Welcome to Movies in Time. I'm Josh Binswanger. The Battle of the Bulge was shot on location in Europe. The filmmaker spared no expense recreating the epic battle that took place in the Ardennes forest of Belgium. In December of 1944, 6 months after the Allied landing at Normandy, Adolf Hitler presented the advancing Americans with a Christmas surprise, a ferocious counterattack. Our Movies in Time feature is Hollywood's take on the battle that turned out to be the Nazis' final offensive. We'll be back later on during our Movies in Time intermission and again at the conclusion of the film to discuss the drama and the real Battle of the Bulge.
Hitler's always a gambler, and it's his final gamble.
But it is a synthesized picture of the actual Battle of the Bulge.
But first, here are Henry Fonda, Robert Shaw, Robert Ryan, and Dana Andrews in the Battle of the Bulge. Joining me here in the studio during this brief intermission to discuss the Battle of the Bulge are Jeffrey Warrow, Professor of Strategic Studies at the U.S. Naval War College, and Donald Miller, Professor of History at Lafayette College and the author of The Story of World War II. Gentlemen, welcome once again to Movies in Time. Nice to have you here.
Nice to be here.
This film takes place in December of 1944. Was this the last shred of hope for the German High Command, or was there really something behind this? Did they think they could turn the tide of the war?
Well, it was their a last gasp here. Hitler's always a gambler, and it's his final gamble. The Germans have lost, they've had 4 million casualties. Their cities have been pulverized. The Luftwaffe has been blown out of the air. But they can still produce munitions. They can still produce, Albert Speer can still come up with 400 to 800 tanks for this thing. They can recruit old men and young boys to fight in this. And what Hitler really wanted to do, I think, here is capture Antwerp, the major supply base for the Americans, and basically get at the what he thought was the inability of the Americans to fight a long, tenacious war. He thought we were soft.
What should viewers look for coming up in the second half of this film?
Well, the second half of the film, we're going to see, what's his name, Colonel Hessler, leading this armored spearhead, through the Ardennes, trying to reach the flatlands to get out to those fuel depots and capture them for these German panzer armies. And the suspense really mounts as the Americans press in on the flank and try to stop them.
And we'll continue our conversation at the conclusion of the movie. But first, Battle of the Bulge continues. Joining me once again in the studio to continue our conversation about the Battle of the Bulge are Jeffrey Warrow and Donald Miller. The producers put a message at the end of this film saying that it was generalized and they wanted to convey the spirit and essence of the battle, thus distancing themselves from some of the actual facts. Do you feel they captured this?
Well, there's an attempt to do that. I mean, the Americans are unready. They're unprepared for this thing. The Germans are mobilized, focused. There's this sense of the panic and chaos in the early part of the movie as the Germans push into Belgium and create the bulge. There's the gas crisis, which was a real one. The American Air Force, the 8th Air Force, had been bombing the bejesus out of the Germans, and so they're really slow, very low on oil, synthetic oil as well as refined oil. So, and that's a crucial factor in this battle.
Yeah, they really do put it all, there's elements of the real situation that are integrated into this film. You've got the armored spearhead in history. It was the 2nd SS Panzer Division, which has the task of breaking through and running out to Stavelot, to the big American fuel dumps within 50 hours to get a hold of those and pass them back to the follow-on units. But it's, they obviously don't have the budget to display an entire SS Panzer Division, so they make it a little brigade, and they make everything's on a much smaller scale. But it is a synthesized picture of the actual Battle of the Bulge.
And most of the stuff that's taking place in those tank battles generally weren't out in the open. We had Sherman tanks, which are very fast, couldn't stand up to those giant Panther and Tiger tanks. So the battles that took place out on the ridge there at the end of the Bulge, they're usually taking place in villages where the Americans are playing hide and seek with the German tanks. And this is a battle that's won by the soldiers. And some of the early scenes capture that, the scenes with Telly Savalas and Charles Bronson, individual rifle companies, guys with bazookas, guys climbing on top of tanks, guys even using in real life, in the real Battle of the Bulge, Molotov cocktails to stop these tanks.
Well, that touches upon the question that we always conclude Movies in Time with, which is, in your estimation, what is the most accurate scene in this film?
Well, I like the scene where Hessler holds up that chocolate cake and said, "This is from Boston," and they got it over here. And this is the American miracle of supply. You know how they can do this. He says to his aide, they have no sense that they can be defeated, and Hitler felt this too. That this is what eventually would win the war for the Americans. It's the ability to get these supplies and men to the front that wins the battle. It's American mobility. We got 250,000 troops into this battle in 4 days on 11,000 vehicles, most of them driven by African-American drivers, and you don't see any African-Americans.
The Red Ball Express.
The Red Ball Express, they're not here.
You know, it's hard to find anything that's historically accurate in this movie because it is this synthesized, generalized account. It's filmed in the wrong place. People die in melodramatic ways. But the scene where the Germans are shooting American prisoners, that really did happen. You know, the Germans killed at least 350 American prisoners in cold blood. Montmedy was the most egregious incident. They killed 65 in a clearing. I think that's what's depicted in this film. And there was this SS unit by Lieutenant Joachim Piper that went around, a roving commander that would go around shooting down American prisoners.
He is Hessler really in the film. I mean, he really is. I mean, that's where he stopped, on the ridge there, and he's in a hurry. He's got to get to those fuel dumps. They have enough. He has enough for about 50 hours, and he's got to get to the fuel dumps, and he's not going to take prisoners.
So
they line
the process.
They're going to slow it down. So they put him in a field at Malmedy, and actually they use tanks as well as machine guns from trucks to blow down these guys, and killed upwards of 100 Americans.
This is great. Well, hopefully folks at home are having a conversation similar to this one after watching this film on the History Channel. Thank you both for coming. Donald Miller, Jeffrey Warrow. Nice to see you.
Thanks a lot, Jeff.
And we hope we'll see you again here on Movies in Time, and we continue to look at history according to the movies. I'm Josh Binswanger. Thanks for joining us.